Do you think that trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sport?
No. I think a lot of people are so woke that they're asleep.
I gave you 12 rules for life and kept my room clean. I'm the Jordan Peterson of rap.
As an old hip-hop head myself, right, I know there is no such thing as a typical route to being a rapper. But if there were, yours wouldn't be it. Tell us a little bit about your story, about how you ended up making the music.
Okay, sure thing. So my story starts way back. So I was born in the UK. I moved to Saudi Arabia with my family when I was very young and lived there and went to school there for a while. Before coming back to England, I went to a boarding school here for a while. I went to Oxford University. I studied computer science. While I was in university, I started rapping. Just began as a hobby to begin with. I released my first album when I was in my second year of university, which did really well. And then after I graduated, I did my music full-time for about a year. Moved to London, worked in the corporate world for a couple of years whilst juggling my music stuff on the side. And then in 2011, I took the big plunge and I've been doing my music full-time ever since.
Yeah, I mean, there can't be many rappers who've had a previous career in the city of all things, can there?
There aren't that many. I am aware of a couple. I don't know if you know, I think he's not a rapper, but I don't know if you know John Legend used to actually work for, I think, Boston Consulting Group. I'm aware of a few other rappers who have worked in investment banking and things like that. So it's atypical, but it is possible, you know. People often joke about me going to Oxford and getting a degree from there and then going on to become a rapper. But I always say, you know, a degree is to open doors, not to close them.
Now, none of this is to say that you're not political with your music, and indeed with your own views. You once described yourself. I remember reading this, and I think it's a great like as the Jordan Peterson of rap, and that was all to do with a tweet, a video that you did. Just tell us the story there.
I posted a video of me doing a 230 kilogram deadlift, around 500 pounds or so, and in the video, I said something like, the caption was, I keep hearing about how biological men have no advantage over women in 2019, so watch me destroy the British women's deadlift record without trying. And then I wrote, P.S. I identified as a woman whilst doing this lift, so don't be a bigot. And the video went crazy. It's got almost approaching 1.6 million views now. It was covered by lots of national news, lots of international news. That may well have been how you found out about me. It went a lot further than I ever imagined or predicted at the point when I tweeted that from my phone. So the response to it has been crazy.
But you seemed to be making a political point when you said, you know, P.S. I identified as a woman. I mean, what are your views on trans politics and trans experiences?
Is that political? I think it was just making a rather obvious point that lots of other people didn't want to make, which is that biological men and biological women are different. That shouldn't be a controversial statement in any sort of sane world. It's something we're all implicitly and explicitly aware of. And you know that everyone knows that the reason why sports are sex segregated to begin with is because males are stronger and faster than females are on average, especially once you get to an elite level. There's a very large performance difference. So
do you think that trans women should be allowed to compete in women's sports?
No, I don't. And I think that anyone who's aware of biology and isn't being driven by ideological and emotional factors would agree with that.
What do you mean by ideological factors?
Well, if you've gone through puberty as a male, I mean, even if I went on a hormonal treatment for 1 year, I think, to bring my testosterone down to a certain level, and then I went and I did actually enter a female powerlifting competition next year, or say Anthony Joshua in boxing transitioned to a woman and next year was boxing against biological women, I think you'd have to be either stupid or, you know, ideologically possessed to think that that would be remotely fair, because it's not. There is a strength advantage, there's a speed advantage, there's a body size difference, and we're all aware of this. So I think it's I just think it's fairly clear cut. I think that's something people know, but because of the current climate, a lot of people are afraid to say that because they fear the mob. But so I was just making a point. It was obviously rather tongue in cheek, But I think the reason it resonated with so many people was just, it was like, okay, finally somebody is pointing this out.
So to what extent then would you respect the wishes of a trans person to be identified, to be spoken about in a certain way in terms of gender pronouns? We're going back to the Jordan Peterson
Okay, yeah,
thing.
sure. In terms of just politeness and being kind to people and not going out of my way to offend people, just like I generally don't, I don't want to, it doesn't matter who I'm talking to. I try to treat every human being that I speak to with respect. And, I was raised to treat people as I wish to be treated. So that's fine. I think the concern, this is the thing that, Jordan Peterson raised up with the Bill C-16 in Canada. The concern is when it starts affecting laws or in the terms of sports, like regulations and things where there's actually a direct potential impact where you're forcing something on other people. I'm very much a live and let live kind of person. So, but I think as soon as it starts encroaching on stepping on other people's toes or forcing other people to accept things or believe things, and it doesn't matter what that's about, I think that's when society, a free society anyway, runs into some issues.
Given all of that, given that you're a young, articulate black man, what do you think about a topic of conversation that is arising a lot more often these days, the idea of reparations?
Reparations, even in the US?
In the US, and well, remember them, the UK itself had a major role within the slave trade for a long time. People have argued in the past that it's about time that we paid our debt.
I think people just need to move on. I think it's good to acknowledge history, and it's important to be aware of the mistakes that have been made in the past. But I think also it's important to not dwell on them, and that's from all sides. Okay, so nobody who's alive now in the Western world, there's minor bits of slavery that still exist, but that we're attempting to stamp that out. But generally speaking, nobody was a slave, nobody owned a slave, nobody's parents even were slaves or slave owners or anything like that. I feel like we should draw a line in the sand there and move on. And also from a actual point, even if someone did make a case for it, it's not tenable to actually implement. So if you take the USA, for example, where that would probably be the best case for it, how on earth would you even calculate who is owed what and who pays what? There's no feasible way, I think, that it would really be done. I think certain politicians are talking about it as a political tool to, gin up votes in certain communities, but I don't know. I'd like to see how they would propose that it actually be implemented. I don't think it's tenable.
You must though be aware that there would be African Americans who hear you suggest,
of course,
it is time to move on, who point out that slavery and the absence of the same civil rights as white Americans are so central to their black identity that it's almost impossible to move on, to box it up and put it to one side and ultimately, as you're suggesting, forget about it.
Yeah, I'm not even saying forget about it. You can acknowledge something that you can. The thing is, if you're going to talk about slavery, how far are you going to? Every race of people has been enslaved at some point in history, and every race of people has enslaved people in history. I think when people talk about slavery, they always think specifically about slavery in North America, but the word slave itself comes from Slav, so from Eastern Europeans. So there have been white people enslaved, there have been Arabs enslaved, there have been, and it's. I think part of that conversation is because people view it in such a narrow lens. So if you were going to really go back and do that, you'd have to really look at everybody's history. There'll be black people who you'll find who their ancestors were slave owners and were selling slaves, and you'll find Arab people in the same situation. You'll find white people who are descendants from slaves, and so you'd have to expand the whole conversation to millions and millions or billions of people, and I don't know how you'd find out who it was what.
Does it at all concern you that, let's just confine this entirely to the world of music, that there will be those who suggest, those who are surprised by the fact that you're rather less, in inverted commas, woke than the majority?
I think a lot of people are so woke that they're asleep. I think there's almost two separate definitions of woke now. There's one level where it basically means being ideologically possessed by some of these ideas, which doesn't strike me as meaning what woke should. And then there's like a layer below that where someone realizes, okay, some of these things don't really make sense or are not good ideas or are not tenable, or some of them even are directly in conflict with each other. For example, I use that thing of promoting multiculturalism whilst claiming things are cultural appropriation. So if I make sushi, I'm now culturally appropriating Japanese people, but at the same time you're saying, oh no, I should embrace Japanese culture and cuisine. It's like, well, which one of these things is it? If you're gonna stick a whole bunch of people from different places in London or in New York, any place where you've got a whole bunch of religious, ethnic, racial, whatever diversity, then people are gonna, people are going to influence each other. Things are going to rub off on each other. I mean, I'm a rapper. Hip hop was created in New York in the 70s. So are British rappers culturally appropriating Americans? Are Chinese rappers, German rappers, are only Americans allowed to rap? I mean, how far do you go with that? I mean, I remember the first time I really heard this phrase cultural appropriation was actually in relation to Eminem when I was a teenager. That was the first time I really heard that phrase, because there were people claiming that Eminem was culturally appropriating black culture and hip hop and whatever. And I remember even at that time being a little bit puzzled by this idea of you're saying, well, you want everybody to participate. This is an art form that's created and everybody can participate. It's inclusive. And then someone who's outside of a certain box wants to get involved, and now you want to demonize them for that. And it doesn't make sense.
Hey, there are even a few Scottish rappers these days.
Of course there are, as there should be. It's good.
Zuby, many thanks for joining us here
You're
on
welcome.
Divided.